Bob, I'm going to be direct with you. This isn't working out. Kyle Morrison sat behind his glass desk in the manager's office of the Apple Store, Palo Alto. 26 years old, Stanford MBA, 3 years managing this location. Every surface in his office was clean, minimal. Apple branded the physical manifestation of a corporate culture that valued sleek efficiency above all else. Across from him, Bob Katz sat quietly. 67 years old, gray beard neatly trimmed, reading glasses on a chain around his neck. Blue Apple Store shirt perfectly pressed despite his morning rush to get here by 8 a.m. on public transit because his 2009 Honda Civic had died 2 weeks ago, and he couldn't afford to fix it. You've been here 12 weeks, Kyle continued, pulling up performance metrics on his iPad. Numbers. Clean. Merciless. Your customer satisfaction score is 67%. Store average is 91%. Your average ticket resolution time is 18 minutes. Store average is 9. Last Tuesday, you asked Tyler, who's been here 8 months, how to reset a Series 9 Apple Watch. The Tuesday before that, a customer complained that you clearly didn't understand modern technology. He set the iPad down and looked at Bob directly. I'm not trying to be cruel, but I have a store to run, metrics to hit, a team that needs to operate at a certain standard, and he searched for the right word, you're not meeting that standard. I don't think this environment is the right fit for you. Bob said nothing for a moment. His hands folded in his lap, scarred in strange places with calluses that didn't match someone who'd spent their career in retail, were perfectly still. Can I ask you something, Kyle? Kyle blinked. Usually when he had this conversation, people cried. Or got angry. They didn't ask questions. Sure, why did you want to work for Apple? A beat of silence. What? Why Apple specifically? You have an MBA. You could manage any retail operation. Luxury brands, electronics, apparel, anything. Why here? Kyle leaned back slightly, thrown off script. Because Apple changed everything. The Mac, the iPod, the iPhone. They fundamentally changed the relationship between humans and technology. I wanted to be part of that legacy, part of something that mattered. Bob nodded slowly. That's a good answer. Thanks. But it doesn't change. I wanted to be part of that legacy too, Bob said quietly. I was. 40 years ago, Kyle opened his mouth. Closed it. Bob reached into the worn canvas bag he carried everywhere and pulled out something Kyle had never seen outside of a museum. An original Macintosh 128K computer. Cream-colored plastic yellowed with age. The small smiling Mac logo barely visible on the front. On the side, in faded permanent marker, property of R. Katz, Macintosh Team, 1984. He set it gently on Kyle's spotless desk. Kyle stared at it like it had appeared from another dimension. I was 27 years old, Bob said. Same age you are now. Working 18-hour days in a building in Cupertino that smelled like soldering flux and instant coffee, and the particular kind of desperation that comes from knowing what you're trying to do has never been done before. 12 of us, building something we thought could change the world. His voice was quiet, matter-of-fact, like he was describing someone else's life. We were right. Robert Katz had grown up in Queens, New York, the son of a hardware store owner who fixed radios as a hobby. By age 12, Bob was taking apart televisions and putting them back together. By 16, he was building primitive computers from kits. By 22, he had a computer science degree from MIT and a burning conviction that computing wasn't just for universities and corporations, it could be for everyone. D arrived in California in 1979, drawn by the same fever dream that pulled thousands of young engineers to Silicon Valley. The sense that something seismic was happening, that technology was about to break free from its institutional constraints and become something personal, human, accessible. He'd worked at Atari for 2 years, learning the rhythms of consumer technology. Then, in 1982, a headhunter had called. There's a company called Apple. You've heard of the Apple II. Everyone's heard of the Apple II, Bob had said. They're building something new, something secret. They want engineers who think differently. Are you interested? He'd started at Apple on a Monday in January 1983. By Wednesday, he was working on a project so exciting it sometimes made his hands shake. The Macintosh. The team was small. 12 core engineers plus designers, plus a rotating cast of other contributors. And above them all, driving them, pushing them, sometimes terrifying them, Steve Jobs. Bob had his first real conversation with Steve in March 1983 in the parking lot at 2 a.m. when both of them had stayed late, Steve reviewing designs, Bob debugging code. "You think this will work?" Steve had asked, staring at nothing in particular. "The file system? Yes, if we... Not the file system. This. The whole thing. The idea that regular people will use computers. Actually use them for their lives." Bob had thought about it seriously. "Yes, I think it will work. I think it has to work. Because the alternative, a world where computers stay locked away in offices and universities, that world doesn't feel right." Steve had looked at him for a long moment. "Good. That's the right answer. The people who don't believe it can leave." Bob had believed it. Every day for the next 4 years, to the impossibly long hours, and the impossible demands, and the occasional moments of genuine magic, when something they'd built worked exactly as they'd hoped. He'd been in the room when Steve introduced the Macintosh to the world in January 1984. Had heard the crowd go insane, had felt something he'd never felt before and never quite felt again, the certainty that he participated in something that would outlast him. "You left Apple in 1987, Kyle said slowly. He'd Googled Bob's name on his phone under the desk while Bob was talking. Found almost nothing, a few archived mentions in old tech publications, a name in a 1984 Apple press release about the Macintosh team. Why? Disagreement over direction, Bob said simply. Steve and I had different visions for where the personal computer should go. He was right, I was wrong. But at the time, we couldn't see past the argument. You left and Steve got fired 2 months later. Yes, and then you started 3 companies, Bob said. 2 failed. 1 succeeded for a while. Internet software, late 90s. Sold it in 2001 for enough money to feel like I'd won. And then, Bob's jaw tightened slightly. .com crash took most of it. Bad investments took the rest. My wife, Carol, we were married 31 years. She got sick in 2015. Pancreatic cancer. The medical bills were, he paused, substantial. Kyle said nothing. She died in 2017. The house we'd lived in for 20 years went to the bank in 2018. I've been renting since. Working consulting jobs when I can get them. He looked at the Macintosh on Kyle's desk. I came back to Apple because I needed stable income and health insurance. And because, he smiled slightly, because it felt like coming home, even if home had changed. Kyle looked at the original Macintosh, then at Bob. Then at his iPad with the termination paperwork loaded. "You helped build this company," Kyle said. "It wasn't a question. A very small part of it, a long time ago, and you came back to work retail." "I came back to work," Bob corrected gently. "The nature of the work doesn't bother me. What bothers me is the idea that I have nothing left to contribute, that I'm just taking up space." He glanced at the iPad. "Though perhaps you feel differently. Let me ask you something. Have you ever almost made a decision, fired someone, dismissed someone, written someone off, and then discovered you were seconds away from the worst mistake of your life? Have you ever stood in a room with someone extraordinary without knowing it? Keep that feeling." Because what happened next in that Apple Store manager's office changed not just Kyle Morrison's career, but the entire way he thought about people. Kyle set down his iPad, the termination form untouched. "Why didn't you tell me," he asked, "when you interviewed? Why didn't you say you were on the original Mac team? Would it have mattered?" "Of course it would have. For the wrong reasons," Bob said. "I don't want to be hired because of what I did 40 years ago. I want to be judged on what I can do now, what I'm willing to do, whether I show up and try and contribute." He paused. "I admit I'm slow with the newer interfaces. My hands aren't what they were. And some of the new systems, the way iOS has evolved, some of it is genuinely different from what I know. I'm learning." "You shouldn't have to learn," Kyle said, something shifting in his voice. "You should be teaching." Bob raised an eyebrow. Kyle stood up, started pacing, something he did when his brain was moving faster than his professional composure could contain. Okay. I've been thinking about this wrong, completely wrong. You know why our customer satisfaction scores are high?" Speed, Bob said. "Efficiency. Those are metrics. But our actual best customers, the ones who come back, who buy multiple products, who refer their friends, they're not here for speed. They're here because they trust us, because they feel like we actually understand what they need." He stopped pacing. "Tyler can reset an Apple Watch in 30 seconds. But he can't explain to a 70-year-old woman why she should trust putting her photos in the cloud." He can't explain to a small business owner why the Mac ecosystem will change how they work. He can fix things, but he can't make people believe. And you think I can, Bob said. You literally helped create what they're buying, the whole philosophy. The whole idea of technology being human and accessible and Kyle gestured at the original Macintosh. This, you built this, you know what it means, not as a product, as an idea. Bob was quiet for a moment. You're very smart for 26, Kyle almost laughed. I almost fired a founding member of the Macintosh team for being too slow to reset a smartwatch. I feel like an idiot. You were doing your job, Bob said, measuring what you could measure. You couldn't measure what you didn't know. By the end of the afternoon, everyone in the store knew, not because Kyle announced it, though he did eventually, in the most professional way he could. It happened organically, the way these things do in small communities. Tyler had gone into the break room for a charging cable and found Kyle and Bob still in the office, the original Macintosh on the desk between them. Kyle leaning forward, asking questions with the intensity of a student who just discovered their textbook was written by someone who was also in the room. Tyler had told Marcus. Marcus had told Jennifer. Jennifer had told the group chat. By 4 p.m., employees were finding reasons to walk past the manager's office window. By 5 p.m., a customer 40-something tech industry background, the kind who came into the Apple store not to buy anything but just to be around the products, had noticed the original Mac on the desk and stopped walking. He'd come to the door. Knocked. I'm sorry to interrupt. Is that a 128K? Kyle had opened the door. The customer had introduced himself as David Park, currently at Google, previously at Apple from 2003 to 2011. He looked at Bob like he was seeing a ghost. Are you Robert Katz? David asked. The Bob Katz from the original Mac team? Guilty, Bob said. David had physically stepped back. My God, I wrote my college thesis on the original Macintosh operating system, on your work specifically. The file system architecture you designed is still, the principles are still in use. Modified, evolved, but the core logic. He shook his head. I cannot believe you're working at a retail store. Well, Bob said, someone has to help people with their iCloud backups. David had laughed, then taken out his phone. Would you be willing to? Would you mind if I took a photo? And if I shared it, some people I know would absolutely lose their minds. David Parp's tweet went up at 6:17 p.m. Just walked into the Apple store in Palo Alto and met Bob Katz's original Macintosh team, 1984. One of the 12 engineers who built the OS that changed computing forever. He's working as a Genius Bar employee. Take a moment to think about that. And go thank your local tech support staff. You have no idea who they might be. It had 847 retweets by midnight. 12,000 by morning. By the time Bob arrived for his Thursday shift, there was a small group of people outside the store. Not many, 6 or 7, holding original Mac products, waiting. Kyle had called him the night before. Bob, I need to tell you something. I talked to our regional director, and then she talked to someone at corporate, and Kyle, Apple's head of engineering, wants to have a call with you. Today, if possible. They want to talk about a role in their heritage and innovation program. Working with current engineers, sharing institutional knowledge, teaching. Bob had been quiet for a long time. Teaching. You said you wanted to contribute. This would be contributing, at a level that actually matches what you know. What you've done. Another silence. Can I think about it? Of course, Kyle said. And Bob, I'm sorry for almost firing you for not seeing what was right in front of me. You saw a slow old man who couldn't reset an Apple Watch, Bob said. That's also true, by the way. I really am slow with the new interfaces. Kyle laughed a real laugh, surprised out of him. I know, we'll work on that. Bob didn't take the corporate role immediately. He thought about it for a week, talked to his daughter in Portland, who cried. Talked to an old colleague from the Mac team who was now retired in Vermont and told him he was insane to even hesitate. In the end, he said yes. But with one condition. I want to keep some Genius Bar hours, he told the regional director on their call. Not many, maybe 10 hours a week. The retail stuff. Why? She sounded genuinely confused. Because that's where people are. Real people with real problems. A grandmother who can't see her grandchildren's photos because her iCloud isn't working. A small business owner whose computer crashed and took his invoices with it. Those problems matter. He paused. The work doesn't have to be glamorous to be important. The regional director was quiet for a moment. That's not what most people say when we offer them a role like this. I'm not most people, Bob said, not with arrogance, just with the calm certainty of someone who'd spent 40 years learning exactly who they were. 3 months later, Kyle Morrison sat in a company-wide training session, watching a presentation about the history of the Macintosh. On the screen, photos he recognized. A young man with a full dark beard and bright eyes, leaning over a circuit board with 12 other people who looked like they hadn't slept in weeks, and at the front of the room, older, slower, but with those same bright eyes. Bob Katz, telling the story of the day they turned on the first Macintosh and heard it say, "Hello," in a digitized voice, and the whole team had gone completely silent because none of them, not even Steve, had heard it out loud before. It said hello, Bob said, to a room of Apple employees who knew every product release, every stock price, every design iteration. And we realized we'd built something that could speak, that the machine had a voice, and if it had a voice, it had a personality. And if it had a personality, it was human. And if it was human, then everyone in the world could connect with it. He paused. The room was silent. That's all we ever wanted. A computer that said hello, that saw you as a person, that met you where you were. Kyle, sitting in the third row, looked at the presentation screen, then at Bob, then at his own MacBook Pro, open in front of him. He closed it gently and listened. 6 months after Kyle almost fired him, Bob Katz was featured in an internal Apple retrospective on the 40th anniversary of the Macintosh. The original Mac 1228K now lived in a case in the Apple Store Palo Alto on a small display near the Genius Bar. A placard read, "This machine was used by Robert Bob Katz, original Macintosh engineer, 1983, 1987. He came back to Apple in 2024 because he believed in what he'd helped build. So do we." Bob had asked them to add one more line. It read, "The work doesn't have to be glamorous to matter." Kyle Morrison was promoted to district manager 8 months after that Tuesday afternoon in his office. In his first all-hands meeting with his new team of store managers, he told them one rule above all others. Before you fire someone, before you dismiss someone, before you assume you know what someone is capable of, find out who they are. The whole story, not just the metrics. He paused. You might be looking at someone who helped build the company you work for. And every person in that room remembered the story of the Genius Bar employee who almost got fired for not knowing how to reset an Apple Watch, the one who'd helped invent the technology inside it. Bob Katz's story reminds us that innovation doesn't have an expiration date, that the people who built our world are still walking among us, sometimes slowly, sometimes struggling, sometimes working jobs that seem completely mismatched with their history. The genius at the Genius Bar might have helped create the device you re-holding right now. If this story moved you, like this video, start with Apple fans, tech workers, or anyone who's ever been dismissed for being too old or too slow. Subscribe for more stories of hidden legends. Have you ever discovered someone's incredible background after judging them? Tell us below. Remember, every device you use was built by someone. Every company you admire was founded by humans. Some of those humans are still here, still working, still contributing. Say hello to your local Genius Bar employee. You never know who you're talking to. See you in the next story. Bob Katz's story reminds us that innovation doesn't have an expiration date, that the people who built our world are still walking among us, sometimes slowly, sometimes struggling, sometimes working jobs that seem completely mismatched with their history. The genius at the Genius Bar might have helped create the device you re-holding right now. If this story moved you, like this video, start with Apple fans, tech workers, or anyone who's ever been dismissed for being too old or too slow. Subscribe for more stories of hidden legends. Have you ever discovered someone's incredible background after judging them? Tell us below. Remember, every device you use was built by someone. Every company you admire was founded by humans. Some of those humans are still here, still working, still contributing. Say hello to your local Genius Bar employee. You never know who you're talking to. See you in the next story. Bob Katz's story reminds us that innovation doesn't have an expiration date, that the people who built our world are still walking among us, sometimes slowly, sometimes struggling, sometimes working jobs that seem completely mismatched with their history. The genius at the genius bar might have helped create the device you re-holding right now. If this story moved you, like this video, start with Apple fans, tech workers, or anyone who's ever been dismissed for being too old or too slow. Subscribe for more stories of hidden legends. Have you ever discovered someone's incredible background after judging them? Tell us below. Remember, every device you use was built by someone. Every company you admire was founded by humans. Some of those humans are still here, still working, still contributing. Say hello to your local Genius Bar employee. You never know who you're talking to. See you in the next story.